This woman is kneeling in front of her fiancé to beg for forgiveness. But she doesn't know that he has already rolled in bed with her best friend. When their intimate video is suddenly shown on the big screen at the wedding venue, the bride is shocked to realize that the groom is her first love. Click to watch a 6-year forbidden love triangle. A crazy reversal from girlfriend's love to marital betrayal. Years later, I met my first love again, and he turned out to be my best friend's fiancé in front of my house. I clung to his arm under the influence of alcohol. I don't really mind if Mr. Johnson stays the night, I said. Ethan Johnson's pleasant voice sounded in my ear. Amanda, you overestimate yourself. Sarah is still waiting for me downstairs. My best friend was getting married and invited me to dinner to introduce her fiancé. Before going, I asked Sarah on the phone, what should I call him? Ethan Johnson. I was stunned for a moment, because my first love from years ago was also named Ethan Johnson. What does he do for a living? I comforted myself, thinking the world couldn't be that small. He works in his family's corporation. I'm not really sure. It's arranged by our parents. You know, they're almost getting married and she doesn't even know him well. Money really can drive people crazy. Sarah comes from a wealthy family and is an only child. She's been spoiled since childhood. But she has no say in her marriage. A few days ago, she was still talking about falling in love with a college professor. Now, she's about to marry a strange man. The dinner invitation was sudden, and I rushed to the restaurant right after work. When I arrived at the restaurant, only Sarah was sitting at the table. She was wearing a white dress and had light makeup on. She really looked like a rich lady, completely different from her usual smoky makeup style. Our eyes met, and I signaled to her that I understood. We'd act out a drama like Game of Thrones. Later, after I sat down, I stared at the empty seat across from me and asked, where is he? Your future husband? Before Sarah could answer, a familiar voice came from behind me. Me. Sarah stood up to greet him and tugged at me, but I froze there, too scared to turn around. In the restaurant, the violin music was melodious, but I only felt cold all over. The world is really that small. The man in front of me was wearing a blue business suit with a faint smile on his face, gradually overlapping with the figure of the boy in my memory. 3 years ago, he knelt down in front of the whole school and begged me not to leave, but I didn't look back. 3 years later, the youthful arrogance on his face had faded, replaced by more maturity and stability. Sarah introduced him to me. This is Ethan Johnson. He just returned from abroad and is also in the construction industry. Oh. I replied absent-mindedly and took a sip of water. Obviously, Sarah didn't know about Ethan and my past. As for Ethan, his eyes were sharp, like a wolf, lying in wait for a long time to bite the throat of its prey. In all these years, I've only seen Ethan like this once. That night, I was almost bullied by a hooligan. I only got a few scratches, but that hooligan ended up with 2 broken ribs. Feeling uncomfortable under his gaze, I forced myself to be calm and boldly reached out my hand to Ethan. Hello, Mr. Johnson. I'm Amanda, Sarah's friend. My startup is also in the construction industry. I hope we'll have a chance to cooperate in the future. Ethan didn't shake my hand. He lowered his eyes and played with his water glass, as if talking to himself. Long time no see, Amanda. Sensing the awkward atmosphere, Sarah's eyes darted back and forth between me and Ethan. You two know each other. Ethan also looked up and stared at me playfully. I knew he was waiting for my answer, but 3 years had passed. How could I introduce my relationship with her fiancé to Sarah? First love, ex-boyfriend. Sarah tugged at my sleeve, and I finally came to my senses and withdrew my hand. Sarah, I haven't had a chance to tell you. Mr. Johnson and we were college classmates. I'm sorry, Sarah. After tonight, I'll tell you everything. Sarah smiled gently and said it was great that we knew each other soon. She changed the topic, surprisingly. The whole dinner went by harmoniously. Ethan didn't talk much and only chimed in occasionally. He skillfully picked out the peppers and served food to Sarah, just like he used to do for me. I lowered my eyes to hide the pain in my heart, feeling that I couldn't stay for another minute. I'm sorry, Sarah. Mr. Johnson, I have a date with my boyfriend tonight. I'm afraid I have to leave now. I pretended to be sorry. Ethan's hand holding the chopsticks paused. I didn't dare to look at him anymore and turned to Sarah for help. Boyfriend. Do you have any male friends other than those related to work? Sarah winked at me and glanced at the food on the table. Ethan. We're almost done eating anyway. I have a bidding meeting tomorrow. Then I'll drive you too, Ethan said, wiping his hands with a handkerchief and standing up before me. That I felt a bit awkward and didn't move. Ethan deliberately turned back and asked me, what? Not willing, my dear college classmate. He emphasized each word, and it felt like my heart was breaking into pieces. That I in the car. Ethan and Sarah sat in the front seat. I pretended to be asleep in the back seat. Actually, I didn't have any date. I just randomly named a nearby bar. The summer night wind was a bit cool. When Ethan's car drove away, I felt a bit sad. In college, Ethan often drove me to my part-time job, but I always had to leave 10 minutes early because he didn't want me to get out of the car. That 6'1" guy was secretly a clingy person. That I took a deep breath and walked into the X bar. I sat in the corner and ordered a special cocktail. That I in my sophomore year of college. I worked as a bartender in a bar. At that time, Ethan's mother cut off all his credit cards. So Ethan moved in with me at my grandmother's house. Whenever I came to work, he would sit at the bar and wait for me. On my birthday, Ethan used the last 50 in his card to take me to a horror movie. When the protagonist was running for their life, Ethan whispered, "Look, Amanda, at least we're still alive." In the empty late-night movie theater, Ethan and I thought we could fight for our young love until the end. Until my junior year, I took 300,000 from Ethan's mother and broke up with him. The bartender who taught me how to make drinks made the exact same cocktail for me. It was bitter and spicy. When I took a sip, she said, "Drink up. The more you drink, the less bitter life will seem." I was enjoying my drink when suddenly someone grabbed my hand. Across from me was a young and innocent-looking boy. He looked familiar, and after thinking for a while, I remembered he was Mrs. Smith's son, Lucas. That I in the past 2 years, my grandmother's memory has been getting worse, and Mrs. Smith has been helping to take care of her. So Lucas was like a little brother I watched grow up. I was surprised by how much he had changed after not seeing him for a long time. "You've grown so tall, Lucas. Let sister give you a head pat." Lucas shyly dodged my hand, and the tips of his ears turned slightly red. He insisted on walking me home, saying it wasn't safe for a girl to be alone. That I couldn't refuse him, so I let him, because I had been drinking and was wearing high heels. I was unsteady on my feet, and Lucas helped me all the way. When we got off the elevator, I was startled by Ethan, who was leaning against the door, his long legs crossed, as if he had been waiting for a long time. Then I saw my bag in his hand. I secretly scolded myself for being forgetful. I was so flustered when I got out of the car today that I left it in his car. Lucas looked at me with concern. I signaled to him that it was okay and told him to go back to work. Ethan just watched coldly from the side. I opened the door and walked straight into the house. Behind me, I heard the sound of leather shoes, and then the door clicked shut. I kept a straight face, but my heart skipped a beat. "Boyfriend?" Ethan asked casually. "Ah." I lowered my head to change my shoes, and it took me a while to realize he was talking about Lucas. It's better if he's misunderstood. I reached out to take my bag. "Aren't you here to return my bag? Just leave it and you can go." Ethan Johnson stretched out his long arm and held the bag high. I missed it completely. "Answer me." He grabbed my wrist and continued to press me. A wave of annoyance welled up. The bitterness of our reunion today, the irritation of this confrontation, and the guilt of not having explained things to Sarah. Yet all these emotions burst out at once. My nose was stinging badly, but I held back my tears and stared defiantly at Ethan. So what if he is? So what if he isn't? Ethan was stunned for a moment and frowned tightly. "Amanda, your taste has changed. I thought you only liked money, Mr. Johnson. Caring about your fiancé's best friend's preferences in the middle of the night. Does that fit the dignity of you rich people?" Ethan's eyes grew colder under the influence of alcohol. I clung to his arm. "Or is it that Mr. Johnson still has feelings for me? You're wealthy, and we were quite compatible in other ways." I stared pointedly at a certain part of him and traced circles on his shoulder with my fingertips. "So, I don't mind if Mr. Johnson stays the night." Ethan squeezed my hand harder, and the veins on his arm bulged that we were together for 3 years. I knew exactly how to anger him, but in the past, he would always pester me mercilessly. Now, he looked at me like a stranger, as if he had never known me. My body couldn't help but tremble. But I felt a bit more relieved the next second. Ethan suddenly gave an ambiguous smile. He pulled me forward, leaned down, and his lips stopped next to my ear. His voice was seductive, but his words were icy. Amanda, it was your dear best friend who asked me to come. You're overthinking it. Could it be that Ethan told Sarah? My heart skipped a few beats. And Sarah sent me a message on WhatsApp, she said. Amanda, you left your bag in Ethan's car. I told him he had to return it to you in person. Otherwise, if someone sees the tender documents, it'll be a disaster. I stared at these words, feeling both relieved and frustrated, because I didn't know if I had the strength to confess my past with Ethan to Sarah. I looked up at Ethan. The light hit his face, and he looked at me with a half smile, as if pronouncing the verdict on our relationship. Just like in my countless dreams over the past 3 years. He said, Amanda, when you left 3 years ago, there was no chance for us anymore. After Ethan left, I took a cold shower and sobered up a lot. I also marked and organized my suggestions for revising the tender documents and sent them to the project manager. After finishing all this, I opened Sarah's chat on WhatsApp and carefully considered my words, even if, as Sarah said, she really saw marriage as a task. As a friend, I had the obligation to be honest. I typed and deleted a message several times. Suddenly, the screen flashed, and Sarah's status showed, the other party is typing. Could it be that she knew? Then her typing status disappeared. A huge sense of unease overwhelmed me. I had never encountered such a complicated situation before. Just as I was about to confess everything to Sarah, her voice call popped up. Hello, Amanda. I'm doomed. I'm doomed. I'm doomed. Sarah's voice was urgent and panicked. What's wrong? Calm down and tell me, I said. Remember that young professor I was crazy about a while ago? Yeah, the one you said had a really sexy brain. And your favorite bed partner. Right. It's him. He's Ethan's older brother. His real brother. With the same parents. Sarah murmured despairingly. Wait. I remember you said his name. It didn't seem to be Johnson, right? I asked. He took his mother's last name. It's Thompson. His name is James Thompson. I rubbed my forehead. Ethan's mother's last name was indeed Thompson. What should I do? Amanda, if I mess up this marriage, my mom will kill me. It won't be that bad. I tried to comfort her, but I wasn't sure who was worse off, her or me. Amanda, the worst part is that tomorrow night at the charity gala, James Thompson will be there too. I'm supposed to be Ethan's date. Amanda, I'll die of embarrassment on the spot. You have to help me. Help you. How can I help? I was confused. Distract Ethan for me. I'll talk things through with James Thompson tomorrow. How am I supposed to do that? My temples were throbbing. Get him drunk if you have to. You must have a way. Sarah. Actually, the words of confession were on the tip of my tongue. But Sarah hung up in a hurry. She's always so impulsive. I shook my head. Well, anyway, there's no chance for me and Ethan. For now. I should focus on solving the problem with James Thompson. It was almost 5 p.m. When I finished dealing with the tender, there were still 3 hours until the charity gala. I leisurely went to the Chanel makeup counter nearby and got my makeup done. Then I bought a long black velvet dress in the mall, since I had to distract Ethan. I had to put in some effort. I opened the inner compartment of my bag and took out a small silver promise ring. This was our couple's ring. We made it ourselves on our first anniversary. It was a simple little ring with J engraved on it. His beautiful fingers got blisters from the work, and I felt bad for a long time. I put the ring on my finger and strolled towards the venue. Not many people had arrived yet. When I was signing in, I saw James Thompson's flamboyant signature. Actually, I met James Thompson once 3 years ago. I went to get the breakup money from his and Ethan's mother, Mrs. Thompson. He was reading a book beside us, wearing glasses, looking indifferent. So when James Thompson walked towards me with a glass of wine at the gala, I recognized him immediately. Long time no see, Amanda. There were quite a few Thompsons saying this to me lately. James Thompson was just like his name suggested. Very bookish. He and Ethan were polar opposites. Ethan was a born rich young master, with a sense of defiance and pride, while James Thompson was much more reserved and even seemed out of place in the Thompson family. No wonder. After Mrs. Thompson passed away, it was Ethan who came back to take over the company. I just couldn't figure out how this bookish guy was so captivated by Sarah. That little flirt. Just then, Sarah walked in on Ethan's arm through the main entrance, attracting everyone's attention. He was still as handsome and dazzling as he was in college. James Thompson's voice sounded beside me. Amanda, you really surprised me when you came to my house to get the money that day. You said you'd never look back after taking it. I thought you were just talking. I didn't expect you to really drop out of school and disappear. I smiled bitterly. I had no choice. It's just that Ethan never understood why you suddenly broke up with him. He even had a huge fight with the family. He's been abroad for all these years and didn't take a single cent from the Thompsons. I stared at Ethan in a daze. He was skillfully handling the business networking, showing no sign of the rebellious guy he used to be. If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave, I said, nodding and preparing to find Sarah. Amanda, James Thompson called out to me. Do you know that Ethan always wears a small silver ring around his neck? Once, he almost lost it while taking a shower. I've never seen him so panicked. All these years, Ethan has never been able to get over you. The gala was noisy. I stood there, my legs feeling as heavy as lead when I came to my senses. My phone kept vibrating. I answered it, and it was Sarah's voice, deliberately lowered. Amanda, I'm counting on you to handle Ethan. I looked up and saw that Sarah and James Thompson had disappeared from the venue. And not far away, Ethan was walking towards me. 3 steps. 2 steps. 1 step. I calculated the distance between Ethan and me, and then deliberately pretended to sprain my ankle and accidentally spilled the red wine on Ethan. He didn't seem too angry. Instead, he raised his eyebrows slightly when he saw the ring on my left hand. I'm so sorry, Mr. Johnson, I said as I picked up a tissue to wipe the wine stain on him, but Ethan Johnson stopped me. Is your foot okay? His question made me notice a searing pain in my ankle. I and my nervousness just now. I really sprained my ankle. Ethan squatted down and took off my high-heeled shoes. My ankle was red, and the pain made big tears roll down my face. I'll take you home. Ethan draped the suit his assistant brought over my shoulders and picked me up bridal style. I struggled to walk on my own, but he insisted on taking a less crowded back route to leave. Right. He was about to get married. He surely had to be careful about his image during the whole ride. Ethan didn't say a word. I tried to break the silence, but he didn't seem interested in talking, except for the last time when he came to return my bag and we parted on bad terms. This was the first time I was alone with Ethan in a calm manner. My phone rang. It was Sarah. I looked at the screen nervously, worried that Sarah might say something inappropriate and Ethan would hear. Answer it. Ethan motioned to me. I had no choice but to pick up. Sarah didn't know I had sprained my ankle and was excitedly complimenting my acting skills, out of the corner of my eye. I saw Ethan glance at me. Sarah continued. Amanda, I've thought it through. A marriage of convenience is one thing, and love is another. What's more, James said Ethan has a secret love from the past. Why should I be loyal to him? She sounded a bit sheepish. I think I'll be chatting with my professor all night tonight. Then James Thompson's voice came from the other end of the line. What kind of chat do you have in mind? I quickly hung up the phone, feeling guilty. I couldn't help but observe Ethan's reaction. He didn't seem to care. So, you were acting the whole time today. How could he hear that? Ethan, are you all ears? I forced a smile and said, you must be hearing things, Mr. Johnson. Ethan didn't argue with me and asked another question. So, my fiancé is with my brother. God, why does he say it so matter-of-factly? Just as I was thinking about how to cover for Sarah, Ethan interrupted me again. Are you going to tell me to get over it? I nodded vigorously. Fine. You help my fiancé get close to my brother, so you can make it up to me today. How? I stammered. Maybe with a more personal form of compensation. Ethan had a smile on his lips in the dim light of the car. For a moment, I felt like I was back in the past when I was wrapped in the quilt. Ethan was standing beside me, holding his car keys as if he could leave at any moment. That I scooted over and grabbed the cuff of his shirt. Ethan, are you going to see Sarah tonight? Ethan's expression changed, but he didn't answer. That I let out a sigh of relief, but my hands still held on to his. Take off your clothes. I'll have them dry cleaned and return them to you, I said timidly. Ethan just stood there, not moving. As if driven by something, I half sat up and reached for the buttons of his shirt. Are you sure? Ethan's voice was a bit hoarse. That I didn't dare to look into his eyes and kept unbuttoning. The love that had been dormant for over 6 years flared up instantly when Ethan kissed me. My mind went blank. It was a thrilling, almost decadent feeling that I didn't know how much of what happened next was because of love. At least Ethan couldn't possibly forgive me, and I still held a grudge against the Thompson family. But at that moment, I just followed my body's instincts. I took off my coat and was left in just a white camisole. Ethan stared at me intently, and soon he kissed me again. His kisses scattered on my neck and shoulders, and it seemed like he couldn't stop. When we hugged, I felt the cold ring on my collarbone. I grabbed the hanging ring, trying to see the engraving on it, but Ethan suddenly pushed me away and stuffed the necklace with the ring back into his shirt. Still, I saw that the letters on the ring had been scratched. Not long after, Ethan walked out of the bedroom. Then I heard the sound of the door closing. I lay in bed, and the room was eerily quiet. I could even hear the sound of my tears hitting the pillow. The gala. James had asked me if I regretted it, breaking up with Ethan for $300,000. You probably earn more than that in a month now, right? I don't regret it. I don't even have the right to regret, I said. 3 years ago, my mom was in the hospital, and that $300,000 was for her life-saving treatment. I begged every relative I had, but I only managed to borrow $50,000. But my love was worth $300,000. It was enough to save my mom's life. That year, I took the money from Mrs. Thompson and submitted my withdrawal application as promised. After that, Ethan went crazy looking for me. I hid in the city where my uncle lived, staying with my grandmother and focusing on taking care of my mom. Outside the hospital room in that small town, Mrs. Thompson found me before Ethan did. She was overbearing, accusing me of breaking my promise and not leaving her son alone, disturbing my mom and grandmother. That was the day before my mom's surgery. Mrs. Thompson said that if I didn't break up with Ethan completely, she'd make sure I gave that $300,000 back. So I went back to school and said to Ethan in front of all the teachers and students, "Kneel down, and I'll think about not breaking up with you." The always proud Ethan actually knelt down. I threw away our couple's ring and pretended to be calm. I've thought it over, Ethan. I don't love you anymore. I left without looking back. I couldn't bear to. I felt like every cell in my body was in pain. It was a pain like being skinned and boned. Once, Ethan and I were as close as one person, but now, I had to tear him out of my life. Even though it took me an entire afternoon to find that ring later. I knew there was no chance for me and Ethan anymore. What if Ethan regrets it? James had asked me at the gala. That's impossible. Ethan was such a proud and unrestrained person. I had trampled on his pride, and there was no way he'd come back. James was wrong about one thing. Ethan wore that ring not because he couldn't let go. He just wanted to remind himself how much he had hated me. 06. The bidding went smoothly, and all that was left was to sign the contract. The company gave me and the project team a long vacation. I bought some health supplements and headed to the nursing home. Ever since my mom passed away, my grandmother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, the worst time. She was making beef stew and almost burned down the house. I had no choice but to send her to a specialized nursing home. Fortunately, Mrs. Smith took very good care of her. Mrs. Smith said that Grandma was lucid less and less often these days. Most of the time, Grandma's memories were stuck 10 years in the past. Every day at 5 p.m., she'd start getting ready, thinking it was time for me to come home from school and that she needed to make beef stew. When I entered the room, Grandma was sitting by the window, staring into space. When she saw me, she called me Emily. That was my mom's name. Grandma didn't recognize me anymore. Grandma took my hand and said that I had just recovered from an illness and shouldn't overwork myself. Emily. The money for your treatment was obtained from Ethan's family. I'm thinking of saving up a bit more so we can pay them back. Otherwise, Amanda won't be able to hold her head up if she marries into that family someday. My throat tightened, and I held Grandma's hand tightly. Grandma, don't worry. I can earn enough money to take care of us now. But she just turned her head away and ignored me when my mom was critically ill. Grandma was already a bit confused the day Mrs. Thompson left the hospital. Grandma asked me if Ethan's mom was upset, looking at Grandma's cautious expression. I just felt utterly helpless. Asking Ethan to kneel in public was just a spur-of-the-moment angry thing to say that I hated myself for falling in love with him and also hated my own weakness for all these years. I've been punishing myself, but when I started to regain my feelings for him, I found that the guilt was like wrinkles, deeply engraved in my soul. Cutting off all ties with Ethan might be the best choice for both of us. As a reward for winning the bid, Sarah said she'd give me a luxury island vacation package, with the mindset of, never look a gift horse in the mouth. I readily agreed, however. On the plane, I looked at Sarah, who was wearing sunglasses and an oversized sun hat, feeling rather helpless. If you want me to hang out with you, just say so. Why make up this company benefit story? Thank you for creating opportunities for me and my professor. Sarah motioned for me to look behind. James was carrying Sarah's huge Chanel denim bag and sitting diagonally behind us. I took a quick look. The man wearing a hat and sleeping looked kind of familiar sure enough, before the plane even took off. Sarah had secretly slipped away. I messaged her on WhatsApp, scolding her for choosing love over friendship. If this were a Western movie, we'd all be in trouble. The next second, I heard a familiar voice. Excuse me, could you move a bit? I thought I was hearing things. Oh my God. The man in the hat was actually Ethan. Was this a vacation or a nightmare? I looked at Sarah in despair. She motioned for me to look at my phone. Actually, I told my parents I wanted to call off the engagement. But they insisted that going on this trip with Ethan would help us get closer. So I had to bring you and James along. Please, please, help me one last time. Puppy dog eyes. By the way, I told my parents that James and you are a couple. I typed furiously. Aren't you worried your mom will find out? Sarah winked and replied. The person my mom sent to keep an eye on me doesn't have enough money for a first-class ticket. Well, I comforted myself that once we got off the plane, we could go our separate ways, but things are never as simple as I hoped. At the hotel lobby. Because it was peak season, there were no available rooms. And I had to share a room with Ethan. When I was about to ask Sarah for help, she and James had already gone to their room, lost in their own world. And she sent me a very inconsiderate message. I'm leaving my fiancé in your care. Amanda, if you can win him over, I won't have to go through with this arranged marriage. I thought to myself, I understand you don't get to see James often, but is this how you treat your best friend? Sarah replied shamelessly. Who asked you? His college classmate. Not to know about his secret love. Otherwise, why would I need your help? I was left speechless by her words. Just then, my luggage was taken from me. Ms. Brown, Mr. Johnson asked me to take you to your room. A bellboy said the corridor of this villa was long and winding. I was getting tired from walking when the bellboy finally stopped in front of a door. Shall I open the door for you, miss? The bellboy asked, looking at the closed door. I was surprisingly calm. Sure, thank you. After the bellboy left, I still didn't see Ethan. His black suitcase was just placed beside the sofa. I took the opportunity to look around the room. It was a large room. But there was only one round bed. I figured as much. People who came here for vacation were usually newly in love couples. People in an awkward situation like Ethan and me should stay away from each other. Fortunately, there were 2 bathrooms and a living room. I decided to sleep in the living room. It seemed I couldn't count on Sarah. I wandered around the island alone, had some cocktails, and before I knew it, it was getting dark. When I got back to the room, Ethan wasn't there. And his suitcase was gone. I heard James tell Sarah that Ethan had been called back to New York by Mrs. Thompson. As soon as he arrived at the island, Ethan would be taking over the company soon. And he'd surely lose some of his freedom. I was cutting my steak and didn't say anything. The pleasant climate was really uplifting. On the island, I sometimes had a few more conversations with James. I could tell he was trying to sell Ethan to me. One way or another point one day when Sarah wasn't around, I finally couldn't help but ask James, why do you want me and Ethan to get back together? Just so he can call off the engagement with Sarah. James didn't deny it that I asked again. Then why don't you just tell Sarah? What about you? Why haven't you told her? James countered, yeah. Why had I been procrastinating? Because of the bidding. The charity gala. They were all just excuses that I chatted with Sarah almost every day. But I just couldn't bring myself to mention this. Maybe I'm scared. Scared of having to make that choice again. I answered honestly. Just then, Sarah came over from a distance, holding a glass of iced drink. Smiling brightly at us, James waved at her. He then told me, maybe you can try to trust Sarah. She's a really smart girl. She definitely wouldn't want you to be with someone just for her sake. And she definitely wouldn't want you to miss out on your love because of her. What love? Sarah had already sat down next to me. James smiled at her and replied, saying you're my love. Looking at their sweet interaction, I fell into deep thought. 3 years had passed. Did I have the ability and courage to face the Thompson family again? On the third night on the island, I was so tired from learning to scuba dive that I was lying on the bed, too exhausted to move, holding a FaceTime call with Grandma. Mrs. Smith said Grandma's condition had been a bit unstable lately, but the doctor said there was no major problem. Strangely, Mrs. Smith seemed to be holding back something. After hanging up the phone, I couldn't stop worrying, so I got up and ordered a bottle of red wine, planning to drink it while taking a bath and then get a good night's sleep. I was in the middle of drinking when suddenly, the doorbell rang. I looked at the time. It was 10:30 p.m. At this late hour, it was probably Sarah. So I just grabbed a bathrobe and opened the door. There was Ethan, dragging his suitcase. That he had actually come back. That I admit. At that moment, my heart skipped a beat in a rather embarrassing way. When Ethan came out of the shower, I was waiting for him in the living room. I just asked someone to change the bed sheets. I'll sleep in the living room tonight, I said. Okay, Ethan replied, drying his hair. The TV in the living room was showing a movie on a loop. I was lying on the sofa, watching it in the dark. It was a boring horror movie. The more I watched, the sleepier I got. Just as my eyes were about to close, the door opened, and I was startled. It was Ethan. He was holding the half-finished bottle of red wine I had left. I was dealing with some work. Can I come in? In the small living room, Ethan and I sat on the carpet, leaning against the sofa. The plot of that horror movie was getting more and more ridiculous. A headless female corpse was running around in a classroom, and suddenly, the camera zoomed in. I was so scared that I actually shivered and grabbed the nearest thing to me. When I came to my senses, Ethan, who was holding a wine glass, jerked his hand, and the wine spilled all over the sofa and both of us. I'm so sorry, I said as I quickly grabbed a tissue nearby to wipe Ethan. Amanda. Ethan suddenly called my name. Yeah, can you come up with some new tricks? Spilling red wine is really cliché. I was stunned for a moment but quickly realized what he meant. Oh, but Mr. Johnson, you didn't seem completely unaffected, did you? I said suggestively. Just then, my wrist was pulled by Ethan, and I fell right onto him. Before I lost the last bit of my rationality, I saw the silver ring on his left hand again. This time, you won't get poked by it, he mumbled before lowering his head and kissing me. When I woke up the next day, I was lying on the big bed in the master bedroom, and Ethan was nowhere to be seen. When I dragged my aching body to have breakfast, everyone else was already there. This included the person Sarah's parents sent to keep an eye on her. Now, that person had been bribed by Sarah, anyway. Everyone was staring at me. Sarah looked at me curiously. Amanda, why are you walking so funny? I forced a smile and said, it's nothing. Ethan, who had just come back with his food, answered for me nonchalantly. She overdid it with the exercise. I stared at Ethan with wide eyes as he ate his bread as if nothing had happened. The coffee that the girl had just taken a sip of sprayed out. Ethan glanced at her and asked, what's wrong? She went scuba diving yesterday. Is there a problem? Sarah shook her head as she looked at me. No. That's not right. We went scuba diving together yesterday. Why am I not this sore? The girl thought for a moment and said, well, you'd have to ask Mr. Thompson about that. Silence filled the breakfast table on the island that morning. I'm not sure why, but the meal was a complete mess. James quickly pulled Sarah back to their room, and the girl left when she sensed the awkward atmosphere, leaving only Ethan and me looking at each other. Done eating? Ethan asked, seeing that I had cut the broccoli on my plate into tiny pieces. Do you want to talk about something? Yeah, Ethan. Let's just pretend that nothing happened last night. Why? Ethan asked. Because we're not right for each other, I said, still stabbing at the broccoli. In what way? Ethan continued. Is it because I wasn't there for you when your mom was sick? I looked up at him in surprise. How do you know? I visited your grandmother. She gave me this, Ethan said, holding an old-fashioned savings account book. It was the money Grandma had always said she wanted to return to the Thompson family. Amanda, let the past be the past. We can start over, Ethan said firmly. His words were very tempting. As I sat there, the surroundings seemed to quiet down. It was as if the whole world was waiting for my answer, but looking into Ethan's eyes, I couldn't give him the answer he wanted. I returned to New York earlier because there was a problem with the bidding. But before I could go to the company, Mrs. Thompson found me. I hadn't seen her in 3 years, and she still looked as youthful as ever. I wasn't really surprised to see Mrs. Thompson again. There were not only people from Sarah's family keeping an eye on Sarah and Ethan. You're quite close to that girl Sarah, aren't you? Mrs. Thompson stirred her coffee, her tone casual. I don't think you came to chat about small talk, Mrs. Thompson, I said. After all these years, I wasn't that girl who would tremble when holding money. Mrs. Thompson looked at me in surprise and continued. You can't even leave your best friend's fiancé alone. You're really a low-class person. After all, you were willing to do anything for 300,000. What kind of dignity can we expect from you? I listened to her with a cold smile, feeling indifferent. If I remember correctly, I paid back that 300,000 the year before last. My IOU is already invalid. So, what are you talking about? Perhaps because I wasn't intimidated. Mrs. Thompson got angry. She pointed her finger at me and raised her voice. You little vixen. You've already wasted so many years of Ethan's life. And now you're trying to ruin him again. I couldn't take it anymore. Mrs. Thompson. It wasn't me who hurt Ethan back then. It was your controlling nature and selfishness. I'll give you back those words you said to me. And as for being a vixen, I'll take that as a compliment. After that, I stood up, planning to go back to my room and catch up on some sleep. But then I heard Mrs. Thompson's confident voice. Your company and Sarah's just got the project from company name. I remember the contract hasn't been signed yet. If you lose this project, how long do you think your company can survive? Mrs. Thompson's words were like a dagger, piercing through my pretense in an instant. 3 years had passed, and I was still no match for Mrs. Thompson. Back then, it was for my mom's surgery money. Now, it was for the hard work and livelihoods of hundreds of employees in our company. I turned slightly, and my voice involuntarily trembled. What exactly do you want? Mrs. Thompson regained her domineering attitude. She looked down at me and said, disappear from Ethan's life, just like you did back then. Otherwise, I have plenty of ways to make your career go down the drain along with you. Sarah's plan to marry James was strongly opposed by her parents. Mrs. Thompson played a big part in this. With her push, the wedding date between Ethan and Sarah was brought forward. By then, Ethan and I hadn't contacted each other for almost half a month. Sarah came to me every day, crying and coming up with one crazy elopement plan after another. For example, she wanted to take some money and disappear, running away with the man she loved. Or she thought about hiring someone to kidnap her on the day of the engagement ceremony later. Sarah started looking everywhere for Ethan's past love, hoping they could get back together. I was helpless. I didn't want to tell her that if she tried to match Ethan with some past love, our company would go bankrupt. So, I had to work day and night, dealing with all the picky requests from the client. Before Mrs. Thompson put in a word, they were very satisfied with our project. But now I guess it's karma. I thought that as long as I could get through this period until the contract was signed, I wouldn't have anything to be afraid of. Just then, I received a call from Mrs. Smith. I was in the middle of a meeting when Mrs. Smith's call dragged me straight to the hospital. When I arrived, Grandma was already in the operating room. The doctor said her condition was very critical, and they kept issuing notices of critical condition. I sat on the bench outside the ward, smelling the pungent disinfectant in the hospital, feeling dazed. I didn't know what I had been doing all this time. I suddenly thought of my junior year in college. Back then, my mom was in the hospital, and Grandma was by my side. Grandma would always hold my hand and say, "It's okay. Everything will be fine. Our Amanda has been through so much." At that time, I thought I wasn't suffering. Losing my mom would be the real pain, but later, I lost my mom and my boyfriend. Now, my dearest relative was lying in the same hospital bed as before. I could earn a lot of money now, but I still couldn't keep the people I loved. I in the quiet and cold corridor. I couldn't stop crying. I cried and prayed for Grandma at the same time. Finally, Grandma was saved when the doctor told me that Grandma was out of danger. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I just sat on the chair, hugged my head, and burst into tears. However, when I saw Grandma, I found out she had completely forgotten who I was. I in the whitewashed hospital room, with cold syringes and blinking medical equipment. I was with Grandma, who had just woken up. She took my hand but called me by my mom's name. She kept mumbling, "Amanda took the Thompson family's money. She'll suffer if she marries into that family." I cried and said, "She won't marry into that family. We won't let her. Please get better soon. Grandma, we'll stay far away from the Thompsons." But Grandma was silent for a long time. Then she tightly held my hand and said seriously and sincerely, "Honey, you can't do that. Amanda really likes that boy. She's already got the money to treat your illness. You have to get better and earn money to pay them back. We can't hold Amanda back. Once we pay back the money, Amanda won't be at a disadvantage when she marries into that family." Grandma got more and more excited as she spoke. It was as if she had convinced herself and rekindled her hope. Her eyes were filled with longing for the future. I had the feeling that she could almost see me in a wedding dress. Yes, yes. When I get better, I'll earn money too. I know there's a street where there are a lot of bottles to collect. With you helping, don't worry, we won't embarrass Amanda." Grandma held my hand tighter and tighter. Talking so fast took a toll on her, and she soon mumbled herself to sleep. By then, I was already in tears. I used Grandma's withered hand to wipe away the tears on my face and sobbed, "You're not embarrassing me. You've never embarrassed me. You're the best." "Oh, Amanda's here," Grandma said. Her eyes were closed, but she seemed to regain consciousness. I was about to respond when Grandma's tired words stopped me. "Amanda, don't be too sensible. The sooner you hold on to the person you love, the more time you'll have with them. Time waits for no one." There was a comforting smile on Grandma's lips. When Grandma's condition stabilized a bit, I went to company name's office. Today was the day to sign the contract. From now on, I wouldn't have to worry anymore. The assistant following me was so nervous that her hands were shaking. I comforted her not to be afraid and then turned to enter the meeting room. The contract signing went surprisingly smoothly. Although I saw some familiar faces among company name's people, they were all Mrs. Thompson's loyal subordinates. On the way to the company's celebration party, Sarah was still worried about her wedding. I spoke first. "Sarah, I have something to tell you. I won't be going to today's celebration party." "What did you say?" Sarah was stunned and took a while to react. "I'm resigning. From now on, I'll leave the company to you guys." I lowered my head and rubbed the steering wheel, avoiding her eyes. I knew she must be very disappointed and angry right now. But the expected questioning didn't come. After a long while, I heard her ask softly, "Is this because of Ethan?" I stared at her in shock. I had the words on the tip of my tongue, but didn't know how to answer. So Sarah knew everything. "Ethan told me a couple of days ago. He said that from the beginning, the only person he ever wanted to marry was you. Don't forget, for all these years, the therapists you've seen were all recommended by me. But Amanda, I've been waiting for you to tell me yourself. When you were young, you didn't have a choice, but now you have me, our company, Grandma, and all the people who love you don't want you to sacrifice yourself again." Sarah took my hand. Her embrace was warm. What about your wedding with Ethan then? Sarah's face scrunched up again. Yeah. I don't know where Ethan has disappeared to. As the wedding date got closer, Sarah was dragged by her family to try on wedding dresses. Ethan still hadn't shown up. And even James had disappeared in the company cafeteria. I heard 2 employees gossiping. It seemed to be related to the Thompson family. Have you heard? There's trouble at Thompson Group. Ah, isn't that the group Ms. last name is supposed to marry into? I'm not sure. That's too bad. I never expected that James and Ethan would stage a revolt against Mrs. Thompson at the shareholders' meeting. She probably never dreamed that her most trusted son, the bookworm who always wore glasses, had secretly gathered so much dirt on her, and in the past half-month, the shares Ethan had secretly gathered, combined with James, had exceeded hers. I was about to ask Sarah for more details when my phone rang. It was Mrs. Smith. Grandma was insisting on going back to the old house. I once read somewhere that old people can sense when they're nearing the end of their lives. I took a long leave and accompanied Grandma home. The sky was overcast. And suddenly, there was a power outage at home every night at 7:30. Grandma had to watch the weather forecast even though she didn't go out. She would check the weather in New York, because her little granddaughter was in New York. The community center was nearby. And I thought it wouldn't take long to pay the electricity bill. When I came back, the door of the house was open. The rain was getting heavier and heavier. I panicked and started searching everywhere. I even called Sarah to help me contact the local police, since it hadn't been 24 hours since Grandma disappeared. I was worried they wouldn't file a case. At the street corner, I met Ethan. He was staying at the hotel next door. Sarah had told me a few days ago that he asked me to get in the car, and I didn't refuse. We were in a race against time. Grandma's health couldn't take getting rained on. Ethan drove me around the streets. And he also contacted the police to help. Finally, when I was almost in despair, Ethan answered a phone call. He said Grandma had been found at the train station. A kind-hearted person had driven her home. But she insisted on going to the train station. I saw Grandma sitting on the bench at the train station. A wave of helplessness washed over me. Fear, anger, and despair all welled up at once. And I couldn't help but shout at her. Do you know how worried I was? Mom left me. Are you going to leave me too? What's the point of me living alone? But Grandma seemed to be deaf to everything. She just stared blankly at the exit of the station, until the hour hand on the wall moved towards 7 p.m. The announcer's voice sounded in the station. The train from New York to Greensboro is about to arrive. Grandma seemed to be triggered by some switch. She stood up from her seat. Young people started coming out of the exit, pulling their suitcases. Ethan said that because it was summer vacation recently, in Grandma's memory, I was still in college. Today was the day I came home for the summer vacation. She was here to pick me up, but I was right beside her. And Grandma just wouldn't leave because she hadn't seen me yet. Ethan consulted a psychologist. In this kind of situation, family members can tell white lies to stabilize the patient's emotions. He somehow got a suitcase for me and asked me to pretend to come out from the station. Ethan helped me straighten my clothes and told me to smile brightly so that Grandma would be happy. I pushed the suitcase and forced a big smile as I shouted at Grandma. Grandma, I'm home. The moment she saw me, Grandma's eyes lit up, and every wrinkle on her face relaxed into a smile. She reached out to touch my face. You're still crying when you come home, even though you're all grown up. Come on. Let's go home. Grandma made you beef stew. I held her hand tightly. Grandma, let's go home. I've missed you so much. On August 20th, 2021, Grandma was unusually lucid that day. Amanda, she said, rarely calling me by my name. She took my hand and smiled kindly. Ethan and I were by her bedside. Grandma took out a savings account book and stuffed it into Ethan's hand. Ethan, Amanda is a strong-willed girl. She always keeps her troubles to herself. Sometimes, even her mom and I don't know what she's going through. When Amanda's mom was sick, Amanda got the money from your family. It was for life saving. But Amanda's mom wasn't lucky enough and passed away. Here's the money. All of it. I'm giving it back to you. You two should be happy together from now on. It's normal for young couples to have disagreements. Amanda even calls out your name in her dreams. Grandma. I tried to stop her, but her voice was getting weaker. Ethan, after I'm gone, You have to take good care of Amanda. Ethan accompanied me through Grandma's funeral and then rushed back to New York. He had taken over Mrs. Thompson's position now. And his phone was constantly ringing. Mrs. Thompson seemed to have aged a lot overnight. Maybe it was the best punishment for her when she could no longer control other people's lives with her power. Sarah took James to meet her parents again and set a new wedding date. June 10th. She said it was her and James' lucky number. Tonight. Same place. I'll come and give you the wedding invitation, she told me. Ms. Last name. I haven't finished the work for the client yet. Okay. Okay. Your wedding is more important. I rushed to the restaurant but didn't see Sarah and James. Cars on the street came and went. I took out my laptop and was about to continue working on the plan when I heard, "Sorry, I'm late." I looked up abruptly. Ethan was standing in front of me, smiling that I hadn't seen him for a week, and he seemed to have lost a lot of weight. There was stubble on his face and his hand was a wedding invitation, which said sincerely invite Ethan Thompson Amanda Brown. That's Sarah. She said she wouldn't force me. I smiled helplessly. But then I received a message from Sarah. Amanda, look out the window. Across the street, Sarah was standing next to James, making exaggerated heart shapes with her hands towards me. Be happy, Amanda. Be brave. People on the street were looking at her, but she didn't care. James just stood there, looking at her with a doting smile. She's so silly, right? I asked Ethan, and I realized that my face was already covered in tears. Ethan looked at me and smiled warmly. Amanda, thank you for not giving up on me this time. Extra chapter. I bought a new ring. On my way, I passed by Ethan's company and decided to give it to him directly. The receptionist at the front desk greeted me with great respect. Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Thompson asked me to take you upstairs. No, you can just call me by my name, I said, not used to the title. Sure, Mrs. Thompson. The young receptionist was about the same age as the girl who used to keep an eye on Sarah. She was just as obedient to the boss. As soon as I entered Ethan's office, I was pulled and pushed against the glass door with a thud. Did you miss me? He asked in a low voice. I was charmed by his voice and nodded, but I forgot that Ethan wasn't so easily satisfied. When he lowered his head to kiss me, he casually pulled down the blinds to block the view of the dozens of eyes outside. Just as things were getting out of hand, there was a knock on the door. I blushed as I fastened the buttons of my shirt. Ethan, on the other hand, calmly went to open the door. A young guy walked in, looked at me and Ethan for a while, and then suddenly exclaimed, Oh, boss. Isn't this the girl you were always thinking about when you were studying abroad? Congratulations on finally getting the girl. What do you mean? I was confused. Sarah had mentioned this term to me before. Ethan's secret love. So, you mean I'm the secret love? The guy nodded. Yeah, sister-in-law. Back then, so many girls were after our boss in the US. But he always said he was married. And he only had a photo of his wife. We all thought you were gone. Have you said enough? Put down the contract and get out, Ethan said coldly. The young guy stuck out his tongue. Put down the contract. And left. Before he went out, he even winked at me. Honey, why did you suddenly come to the company to see me? Ethan changed his address to me really quickly. My face turned even redder. I took the new ring out of my bag. What? Are you that eager to marry me? I punched him lightly and stuffed the ring into his hand. Let's replace the old one. Ethan, I want to start over with you. Ethan suddenly held my shoulders and called my name seriously. Amanda. Yeah, marry me. So sudden. I can't wait. Aren't you supposed to propose on one knee? I've knelt on both knees before. Okay, enough talking. So, will you marry me? Yes. Let's go home. Why are you in such a hurry to go home? What do you think? 6 years. By now, our daughter would be at least 4 years old. Amanda, you owe me a daughter.